Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Sid, episode number 20. Our guest today is Dr. Thomas Smith. He's a geographer, environmental scientist, and an associate professor in environmental geography at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He teaches on a number of environmental courses, focusing on innovative technology, enhanced experiential learning, and field-based education in geography. That being said, I want to welcome Dr. Thomas Smith all the way from London, UK. Hi, Tom. How are you, sir?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. How are things where you are?
It's pretty gloomy and chilly here,
We currently have a storm battering the whole of the United Kingdom today and tomorrow. It's very windy and lots of heavy rain as well.
Oh,
no
gosh.
Wildfires.
Thank God. Thank God. So Tom, before we kind of get into the subject of this podcast, would you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background to our audience listening to this podcast?
Yeah, well, I was born in Birmingham in the Midlands of the UK. I studied geography at university. I did physical geography in Sheffield, which is in Yorkshire in the north of England. I moved to London, where I did a master's degree in environmental monitoring and modelling. And that's where I decided to do a PhD as well at King's College London, which is part of the University of London. And during my PhD, I set out to measure air pollution in London and looking at how it gets dispersed from the streets and into the atmosphere. But I went to a wildfire in Alberta, Banff National Park, using some of the equipment that I measured air pollution in London with, and it changed my whole view on what I wanted to do with my PhD, and I decided to focus on wildfires. And since then, I got a job as an academic at King's College London, and I've moved recently, well, not recently, 5 years ago now, to be an associate professor at the London School of Economics.
That's great. So I know you mentioned, one of your expertise or areas of education is wildfires. So my first question to you is, if you don't mind taking a time to explain to our audience, what are wildfires and how do they start?
Yeah, wildfires are an important part of almost all of the ecosystems on the planet. It has played a role in helping to manage those ecosystems. It's a natural process. Natural fires in our environment are started by lightning, mostly. There are some rare times when a volcanic eruption, for example, might ignite a wildfire, or an asteroid impact in the history of this kind of geological past. But humans have been playing a really important role for a very long time when it comes to fires. Older cultures, traditional cultures, indigenous cultures have used fire for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years as a way of managing the landscape. And that human use of fire has actually shaped a lot of the landscapes that we see today. We might think of the savannas as being quite natural, but actually humans have been using fire with that landscape for a very long time. And ignitions are now very important, as well as those natural ignitions from lightning as well. So it's important to recognize that it's a natural phenomenon that's quite normal in most of the ecosystems on our planet, but also humans have had a very big role to play for a very long time, and have helped these different ecosystems to adapt with fire.
Great. So I'm going to get back to you, the human reasons, a little bit later in the podcast. Right now, I want to ask you, do you think the wildfires are caused by climate change? And how do these wildfires affect carbon emissions and climate change in itself?
Yeah, it sounds like a simple question, but it requires quite a complex answer, because wildfires are wildfire activity, whether they start, how big they grow to, the intensity with which they burn, is determined by not just the climate. It's also determined by the fuel, the vegetation that's growing on the ground, and it's determined by the ignitions as well. Those are the three really important components. Now, climate is having an undeniable impact on wildfire behavior. And by behavior, I mean how fast the fire spreads and the intensity with which it burns. In many places, hotter, drier conditions associated with more extreme weather, so lengthier heat waves, more drought conditions. This is particularly the case in the UK. California is a very good example of this as well. And in both cases, the climate change is changing the behavior of the fire. But in other places, it's not the climate that's impacting the wildfire activity or behavior. It's things like deforestation or the intentional use of fire to clear the land. And so climate change is playing a role in the behavior of fire in some regions, but in other places, it's other human factors that are unrelated to climate change that are having a bigger impact. And so it's really important not to generalize and to actually think about the different regions of the planet. And in some places, climate is the dominant change mechanism, and in others, it might be something else.
Tom, do you think the rise in human population is one of the reasons? The reason I bring this up is because in order to accommodate these people, you have to build housing. In order to build housing, that is somewhat connected with deforestation, So do you think that's like the rapid growth in human population can also attribute to one of the factors?
Well, perhaps counterintuitively, and this is quite interesting. Despite what you might read in the media, wildfire activity is actually going down according to satellite measurements. It's going up in some places where it's really not a good part of the ecosystem, but it's going down in places like sub-Saharan Africa, the savanna regions, the grasslands. And the reason why it's going down is often because of the human infrastructure that is beginning to fragment the landscape. So in a way, you've got the human influence affecting the built environment and infrastructure, and that divides up the landscape, actually stopping fires from spreading from one place to another. As a fire gets to a road, or as a fire gets to a village or town, it may often stop. And so, but the growing population and the need for agriculture and agricultural and to feed that growing population is also having an influence on wildfire activity, because wildfires are used frequently in agriculture to clear the land after harvest. This is the case in northern India, in the northern Mekong region, in Southeast Asia. It's the case for oil palm plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia, rice stubble burning. All of these, you might not consider them to be wildfires, but perhaps we can call them wildland fires or agricultural fires, are definitely on the increase as a result of changes in global population, for sure. But let's not forget that we are fragmenting our landscape, which also stops the spread of fires in some places. Just like the previous question, really, it's quite a complex situation that is geographically very diverse.
So Tom, based on your research and study, what do you think are some of the environmental issues on wildfires and its impact as well? I mean, you did answer previously that what affects the wildland fire behavior just previously, so that kind of sums it up. But is there something else that you think are some of the environmental issues of wildfires based on your research and studies?
Yeah, I think there are a number of issues. One pressing issue right now, I think, is climate change in the Arctic and the higher latitudes of the planet. Most of the fires here are started by lightning. It's the human ignitions are not the dominant cause of wildfires, and therefore the increasing prevalence of fires there and the increasing intensity of those fires and the burnt area in those regions is a function of climate change. And we know that these parts of the planet, the high latitudes, are warming faster than anywhere else, 2 to 3 degrees warming already compared to 1 degree for the rest of the planet. So that's one area of concern, because the forests are burning, and if they burn more frequently, then they're not going to be replaced, because where once you might have had a fire once every 140 years, it allows the forest to regenerate and grow to maturity. You're now getting a fire every 20, 30 years or so, and that's wiping out the younger trees, leading to a shift in the ecosystem. And the problem with that is all that carbon that was stored in the forest is now in the atmosphere, and it's not going to be sequestered, which just drives further climate change, kind of a vicious cycle in the climate system. Do you want me to talk about a few other regions
Please,
of concern? Yeah, well,
please.
Another one that's close to my research is far away from the high latitudes, is actually in the equatorial tropical regions, fires in peatlands. So you've got the drainage of the land, you've got deforestation. This dries out the soil. So this is not driven by climate, it's driven by human activity for agricultural development and conversion of tropical forests into mostly palm oil plantations or paper pulp plantations. And the problem with these fires is that they smolder, different to the kind of flaming fires you see in forests and in California. And that smoldering releases lots of thick smoke into the atmosphere. All that carbon that's stored in the peat, which has been there for thousands of years, again, is released, and it's not going to be sucked out of the atmosphere anytime soon because it takes so long to accumulate. So you've got this compounding problem of air pollution, the loss of carbon sink, and of course the associated loss of habitats as well, and in these very highly biodiverse regions. So I think those are the two real pressing issues that affect global climate change on a planetary scale.
So Tom, I know it's great that you brought up peatlands. So for those who don't know, do you mind telling them what are peatlands and why are they so important for biodiversity and sustainability?
Yeah, well, peatlands cover quite a small percentage of our land surface, but they store a disproportionately higher content of carbon. In fact, it's a humongous store of carbon. Just the peat in the UK alone stores as much carbon as all the forests of the UK, France, and Germany put together.
Wow.
So, which is an incredible statistic. And yet peat only covers about 10% of the land surface in the UK. So it's a huge, important store. And the reason for this is peat is organic matter that's built up over time. In the higher latitudes, like in Scotland and Republic of Ireland, in Canada, in Siberia, Scandinavia, it's mosses that grow on the surface in these boggy conditions. And when they die, that dead organic matter goes into the bog. And because there's a lack of oxygen in the water, because it's not flowing, it tends to be it's boggy, and because of that, there's a very little decomposition of the carbon in that organic matter, and so it builds up layers upon layer upon layer. And in the tropics, where these peat bogs are underneath huge tropical forests in the lowland areas, where you've got lots of addition of organic matter every year into the boggy conditions, the peat can be 30 or 40 meters thick. And that's a huge carbon store that's taken thousands of years to accumulate. And naturally, it will be waterlogged, it'll be wet, and so it would be resilient to fire. It would be very unusual for peat to catch fire under natural conditions, but because humans in the high latitudes and in the tropics are draining the bogs, draining the swamps, and removing the canopy cover, it really raises the risk of that peat catching fire because it's incredibly flammable. And of course, over millions of years, peat eventually gets compressed into coal. So that is the origin of coal and oil. It was once a tropical swamp forest tens of millions of years ago, and we still have the production of that precursor to coal and oil on our planet in the form of peat.
Great. So, Tom, I also want to mention a couple of things. The global satellite data actually indicate that wildfires are becoming bigger and more intense. Why do you think this is happening, which is actually making our planet more flammable and making fires hard to control? And what can we do about that?
Yeah, as I say, it is a complex situation that the global data sets of fire activity are difficult to interpret because they come from satellites, and satellites can miss a lot of the fires. They don't spot everything. And a lot of the smaller fires, especially for agricultural burning, are definitely missed by these satellites. And the peat fires that tend to burn underground also and they burn at a lower temperature, so they're harder to detect, get missed as well. So it's a little bit difficult to rely on those global statistics, but most indicators suggest that in areas that have had regular fires for a very long time, fire activity is actually going down because of this fragmentation of the landscape that I mentioned. But in areas that are less resilient to fire, I guess, such as the forests of Russia and the tropical forests in places like Indonesia, the fire activity there is going up, which is not a good thing. So thinking about what we do about it, well, the first thing we need to do is address the changing climate as quickly as possible, because things are already approaching the danger level. The storm that's here with me in the UK right now is unusually severe for the UK, which tends to have pretty miserable weather, but nothing too exciting. But this is what the strongest low pressure system that we've had on record, and so we need to do something about that and first. But if we talk about adaptation and how we adapt to change, communities are getting used to new types of fires, and it requires a re-education. Really good example is the UK. Wildfires were barely on anyone's radar here 10-15 years ago, but last year on the edge of London we had wildfires burning people's houses down. To Americans, I know you have devastating wildfires regularly in especially on the west
California,
coast. But in the UK it was kind of unheard of for there to be a fire that actually damages someone's property. We think about wildfires as being something that happens up on the moors far away from people, but that's changing, and with those changes comes the need to be better prepared, and governments in places that are seeing these changes to wildfire behavior are in the UK, our firefighters are now training to know how to fight wildfires, because we've simply never had to fight them before. So there hasn't been that team of firefighters who know what to do. 10 years ago, you would see firefighters turning up to wildfires in their full outfits, ready to fight a building fire, because they simply don't have the kit. And that needs to change, and it is changing here. And it's also changing in other places where wildfire activity is becoming more intense or more prevalent.
So, Tom, do you think, I mean, as you said, I also believe the rise in temperature is a major factor. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, the melting of the glaciers in the Antarctica, we had the world actually experienced its hottest day ever recorded in July of 2023, which actually broke the global average temperature record set in 2016. And actually, some scientists have claimed that the speed and timing is very unprecedented. So do you agree that the rising temperature overall on our planet is actually one of the major reasons? It's very hard to contain the wildfires; they ignite easily, and of course, wildfires are known to spread. It's just like a virus, it just spreads very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a very well-established link between fire weather, which is determined by temperature and the amount of rainfall that you have before a fire, and the spread of the fire and the intensity of the fire. And I think talking about 2023, talking about this year and July, and the fact that the months since July have absolutely smashed any previous records for August, September. Not only broken the previous records, but broken them by a record-breaking amount, record-breaking records. And I think we look to Canada, which has had the most devastating wildfire season on record. The amount of biomass consumed by fires in Canada this year is just astonishingly greater than any previous year on record. It not only did it blow the record, it was about 7 or 8 times greater than any previous amount of fire. And I think that is a huge warning sign that there are very big changes happening in response, very big changes in our biosphere, in our forests, in response to these huge disturbances in the energy balance of our planet caused by the excess greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, which are driving these rapid rises in temperature. And we're feeling the effects as the impacts begin to manifest through extreme weather and the extreme wildfires that we're seeing in places like California, Canada, and now here for me at home in the UK as well.
And it's so interesting that, how you mentioned that the storm system is somehow correlated to the wildfire activity and everything that's going on, something that I could not even think, that could be correlated. So Tom, I want to ask you now, in your opinion, based on your studies, as I said, how much does our decaying infrastructure impact wildfires? What I meant is, sometimes the old power lines that run under the ground, and they have started wildfires in the past as well. How significant are the decaying infrastructure's role in wildfire?
That is an important question, and it varies massively depending on where you are in the world. Of course, some places are developing and the infrastructure is brand new, and those places have had chance to learn the lessons from other places in the world. There are different ways in which you transmit electricity. For example, the infrastructure in California is particularly unfit for the environment in which it sits. A great number of the wildfires in California were probably ignited by electricity pylons, sparking. Another problem is in some places is trains. They tend to generate quite a lot of sparks that under very dry conditions can start wildfires. And infrastructure is certainly plays a role in ignitions all over the planet. Not probably as important as the human set fires for land clearance and agriculture, which are probably the dominant cause of fires. But the infrastructure is certainly a local or regional issue in some places, and the one that springs to mind is California. They really do have an issue with their power grid. But it's important to stress most of the fires on the planet are started by people, but it's what happens after the ignition that is changing as a result of climate change. Whereas once the fire might have petered out and not spread very far, and would have been easy to fight as well by the firefighting agencies, today they get out of control much faster and are too intense to fight using most firefighting techniques, which is leading to huge changes in the way they behave, irrespective of how they started.
So Tom, I also want to ask you, how concerned are you with what's going on? Rise in global temperature, melting of glaciers in Antarctica, that will eventually increase rise in the ocean water level as well. So how concerned are you where we are heading?
Yeah, I'm increasingly concerned. And the past couple of years, the rising temperatures, the average temperatures, the melting of the ice sheets, these are all indicators that something dramatic is happening. The amount of energy leaving our planet versus the amount of energy that comes in is so out of balance right now. The oceans are absorbing way more heat than they were in the past. The paper came out just last week that showed that the ocean heat content has increased by, an unimaginable number. And if that energy had gone into the atmosphere, we'd all be toast by now. But those are all indicators, right? But my concern, my personal concern, is about the follow-on impacts on society. The fact that there's a real risk that now I used to think it would be my children or my children's children that might face the most devastating impacts of climate change. But I'm worried personally now about 10, 15 years time about food security, even in the most developed and rich nations. Our complex economy is very much teetered in a very delicate balance with our environment, and I'm worried that once the food security issue becomes important, that is when you see the collapse of the rule of law and order. And once you get there, then we have a real risk to the society on our planet as we know it. And so it really is urgent. I don't think people realize sometimes that how quickly we could lose control of the civilized world.
That's very well said. So Tom, what is your take on the adaptation of electric vehicles? The reason I brought this up is, in order to control the emissions, the carbon dioxide, monoxide emissions, companies like Tesla, they're rapidly growing. China is their number one market, but US is their number second market. And it is actually gaining tremendous popularity in the UK as well. I would say in Europe, How supportive are you of something that's being done by Tesla or other EV companies in order to combat the global warming aspect?
Well, obviously they want to make money, but I think it's fantastic. I'm proud of the fact that despite our government not particularly caring too much about climate change, the people here in the UK are very quickly switching to electric vehicles, far faster than anyone predicted they would. And the infrastructure is everywhere. On the street outside where I live, there are lampposts where you can charge your electric vehicle. So, it's just impressive at how quickly it's all being rolled out. And no, it plays an incredibly important role. The emissions from vehicles are a huge part of the contribution to the atmosphere when it comes to carbon dioxide. And the electricity generated in the UK to power those electric vehicles can at times be 50-60% renewable. We have really good solar and wind power now here. So you've got these electric vehicles powered by renewable energy or low carbon energy, nuclear and gas, which is a huge difference in life cycle emissions, including the production of the car and the production of the battery, which we know certainly leads to some carbon emissions. But the overall lifetime of the car is going to have, especially in countries like the UK that have quite a clean energy mix for the electricity supply, is a net positive. And I think they're very important in the transition, in the energy transition. And yeah, my sister has one. I don't drive, but living in London, you don't need to. And so yeah, the adoption of electric vehicles is playing an important role.
See, it's so interesting, and it's so fascinating to hear this from someone who is as brilliant and educated as you are, because the electric vehicle sector gets a lot of heat, especially from people who still use the gas car, including myself. But I think they don't see what you see, or maybe they don't want to see what you see, and so I don't know if it's ignorance on their part, or it's just like, as you said, it's a money-making business.
There are multiple reasons why people are in denial about the current crisis. We like to think that some people simply just think it's not happening. Others think it can't be caused by us. The idea that humans have become such a dominant force for danger on our planet. Others think it's not going to be as bad as what us scientists say it's going to be. And others think, well, it's too hard to do anything about it. And in all cases, it's a form of denial, and there are reasons behind this. There are complex networks of businesses, of politicians, and the media that would prefer to keep the status quo, right? It is costly to have an energy transition that is of such a dramatic nature that's really needed. And some people don't want to bear those costs now, but they will be paying for it later. And that short-term thinking is leading to us really not realizing just how close the cliff edge is. And very concerned by that. And denialism is the reason why we haven't fixed the crisis. If 20 years ago, it would have been easy. We just needed to worry about 7 gigatons of carbon per year by 2050. We could have stabilized our climate at 1.5, 2 degrees C. Now it's almost impossible. I mean, it's going to require such a monumental shift. I don't think, well, I think it's possible that next year will be 1.5, if not this year, 1.5 degrees C above the pre-industrial average. If that doesn't hammer home the urgency of the situation, then I'm not too sure what will.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as you can see, also the change in seasons, the starting point, the ending point, we have here spring that goes all the way past kind of summertime, and they are predicting very harsh winter for this year because we really had a mild winter last year. And we had a lot of rain. I mean, rain is an important factor. I mean, you can see major flooding, Bangladesh, parts of US, China. I mean, it's unbelievable, what's going on.
Well, there's flooding happening right now in the UK, and I'm fairly certain that when analysis of these storms, we had a storm last week, we've got a storm this week, it looks like there's another one on the way. They're bringing so much rainfall, and the reason for that is because the Atlantic Ocean is much warmer than it should be. It's way above average. It's in a record temperature for months now. Now, all of that extra heat that's being passed to the atmosphere, we're also seeing a huge amount of extra water that's evaporated into the atmosphere, and that's when it arrives in Western Europe, it gets dumped in the form of rain, and all of this flooding is made worse by all of that extra energy in the atmosphere because there's just more water getting into the atmosphere, and it's accelerating the water cycle. Yeah, and seasons are changing, migratory birds are shifting. Everything in the system that would normally slowly change with geological changes in our Earth's climate, which it's undeniable that the planet was 14 degrees C warmer 50 million years ago, but the changes were so gradual that our biosphere had time to change and adapt. Even the changes during early human history, thousands of years ago, were slow. So society and civilization was able to shift and move and adapt their behavior and practices. But the pace of change right now is the threat. And as I said earlier, the biggest threat is to our food systems because they're extremely vulnerable to these rapid changes.
Very interesting. Tom, before we wrap this up, if you have any closing message for our audience, that you would like to share based on what's going on, please take it away from here.
Yeah, I'm not sure of your audience base, Sid, but I should imagine that a lot of them are concerned about environmental issues. I know you've covered them quite a bit on your podcast, and so I guess I don't need to preach to the converted in terms of most of your audience, but I guess the important thing is for people to reach out to those who are in denial and to get them to think critically. I think people have lost the ability to think critically about the narratives that are weaved in the media. People often consume it without thinking too much about why that might be reported in that particular way or sold in that particular way. And I think those skills are really important. And if you have children, making sure that they are equipped with those skills to carefully think about why environmental issues are presented in a particular way. So yeah, critical thinking is important, and maybe switching off Fox News.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you very much, and I want to also let our audience know that we will put your links, your university link, LinkedIn, X, in the description of this video. And so if they have any questions regarding it, if they want to see your current projects, publications, they want to read, they are more than welcome to reach out to you through those and ask any questions, and maybe contribute towards this cause, as a whole, being a scientist, being a professor, being people who are not in this industry. I think we should all unite together to fight this cause, as it is alarming, and it relates to our existence and civilization.
Yeah.
So Tom, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tom. Be well, stay safe from this storm, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
I'll try. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.